Good morning. Good to see you all here this morning, especially this time of year when the cold is going around and decimating our people right and left. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
So it's good to see you here this morning. We want to welcome Rachel in the church known as Xenia, visiting us from Baltimore. She was received into the church about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. She was raised in Judaism and must have been coming to the church about, 2-3 years ago, and was catechized and then received. So she has a story to tell. I've just met her, so I don't know that story, but she'll be here only this morning. So if you want to get that story, you better get it quick. And we're also delighted to welcome Mary back from Texas. You sure you want to be here at this time of year?
I know.
Honestly.
I'm leaving Tuesday.
Yeah. You came, you saw, you decided it's enough.
I had the snow fix.
Well, as I said in my sermon last Sunday, that was the eve of the circumcision of Christ in the flesh. Remember that I made the point that the slaughter of the righteous ones by King Herod actually reveals that Pascha has begun. That is the Pascha gospel, and it shows how Pascha is embedded in Christmas. That may, unless you heard the sermon, that might be, you might wonder how on earth can that be so. Well, my sermons are, I upload them. I upload the text of the sermons onto the website, so you're welcome to go back and go into this archived sermons, and you can read that and see how the slaughter of the innocents reveals Pascha inside of Christmas. So what that tells us is that Pascha has begun. Pascha has begun with Christmas. So the church now, through her daily assigned scripture lessons, which you want to be reading now every day, will be getting us, as well as with the hymns and the prayers and the feasts of the next few months. The church is going to be getting us ready for Great Lent. And the Great Lent, of course, is when we start getting ready for Pascha. So we're on the march now for Pascha. So my wish in this stretch of the church's liturgical exodus to the tomb of the Lord's Sabbath rest, the font of his resurrection and of ours, really is not only to present this to you and put it into your understanding, but if possible, even to awaken in us a longing to lose our life for the sake of Christ and his holy gospel, that we may find our soul and our life in Christ and in his holy resurrection. So towards that end, I have in mind a study, such as our time permits in this Sunday morning hour, of the Epistle to the Hebrews. Because Hebrews is a thoroughly Lenten and Paschal epistle. I've asked Cindy to prepare us for that study by sharing with us what she finds in her research into the angelology of the primitive Jewish Christian church. What was the teaching on angels, such that some wanted to teach that Jesus was an angel and that he was not the pre-eternal Son of God? I expect that the Christology of Hebrews may pop even more if we have some idea of the Christological heresy that the author of Hebrews is refuting. But to give Cindy the time that she needs for her research, and also for a couple of other reasons, over the next 2 Sundays, maybe 3, I'm bringing in a guest lecturer, Constantine Cavarnos. And this morning I will introduce him to you. So Constantine Cavarnos was born in Boston as a Greek American Orthodox in 1918. He died in 2011. So I hope you're intrigued. how is Mr. Cavarnos going to be our guest lecturer? He died in Florence, Arizona. So he was born in Boston. He died in Florence, Arizona. And there may, that's more than just information. So what I mean is that Father Constantine, Dr. Constantine Cavarnos will be teaching us from his book, Man's Spiritual Evolution. And he'll be teaching at you through me. So as you can see, Dr. Cavarnos is already at the podium, and he is now waiting on the wings for me to finish introducing him to you, which might take the whole session here. So he'll have to wait maybe until next Sunday to give his stuff. It will be taken from this book. Now, I've chosen this book of Dr. Constantine Cavarnos because it makes accessible to our understanding what I have been trying to teach about salvation over the last who knows how many years. I don't mean the theoretical salvation of human interpretation that you get in all the churches, except for Orthodoxy. The Orthodox Church, honestly, I'm not a spring chicken, but even though I'm not a spring chicken, I've not read absolutely everything. But I mean, from my, more and more as I just absorb, from the world around me, I'm coming to the conclusion that the understanding of salvation, that the Orthodox Church is the only church really that understands salvation in the biblical way. What I mean by that is that salvation is found in the sacramental mystery of Christ's crucified, risen, and glorified body. Only in that body and in no other body has death been destroyed. See, that's what salvation is, the destruction of death. That means that salvation is not a message, right? It's not a message that you can believe and now you're saved. Glory to Jesus Christ. As St. James says, the devils believe and they tremble. They're not saved. To believe that Jesus died as a historical fact, well, yeah. But Jesus, I don't know it's so much true to say that Jesus died in history. Listen to this, Matthew. You tell me what you think. I don't know that it's so much true to say that Jesus died in history. That would suggest that history was going along, that Jesus kind of interrupted the flow a bit and appeared for a while, and then he left, and now history goes on. What do we read in Revelations 13:8? We read about the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. I think it's more true to say that Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection is the root of history. And not just history in general. It's the root of true history. It's the root of the history of the people of God, of Israel. Yes, Travis?
Don't some church fathers say that Christ actually made the world from the cross?
Yes. Well, that's what they're drawing from Revelation 13:8 and from several other passages. So that the confession of Jesus as the Christ, the risen Son of God, who took flesh in history, and to recognize him as the creator of the world. You recognize that, and everything will change. Everything will change, including your historiography, your understanding of history. I mean, honestly, look at the back of the bulletin. As from Bishop Maxim Vasilievich, God creates not as a scientist, but as an artist. I think maybe how could you paraphrase that? God creates the world not in history, not as a historical novel, but as an icon, something like that. So the point is that to be saved in the biblical way is the confession of Jesus, the Son of God, incarnate, who was crucified, dead, and buried, and rose again from the dead. To be saved is to, is to learn, is to be united with Christ in his tomb. So that to be saved is to get inside the tomb somehow, not your own tomb, that's Lazarus' tomb, but to get inside of Christ's tomb. To be united, and in order to get into Christ's tomb, the fountain of resurrection, we have to learn how to unite ourselves to Christ. We have to learn how to die with Christ. We have to learn how to be crucified with Christ, crucifying our mortal members, crucifying, all of that, all in us that's earthly. And I honestly, there's places here and there outside the Orthodox Church that where people seem to have caught that a bit, but they're in a theological environment, a religious environment that has no understanding of that. So they present their thoughts, which just for them right now is an hypothesis, is something that they're speculating about, and their thought goes basically nowhere because that's not the tradition that they're in. But in the church, this is the understanding of salvation, and this is what the church is all about. She's all about getting us into the tomb of Christ, teaching us how to be united to Christ, teaching us how to put to death what's earthly in us, so that we can begin to rise up, in the risen Christ as the new creature, the new man. So anyway, the reason I'm choosing, the reason I like Father Dr. Constantine is that he explains this in a very accessible way. So as soon as we can bring Dr. Constantine up here, and he can start talking to us, he'll be going through his book here, Man's Spiritual Evolution, with us, and mapping out for us the path to salvation, the path to the tomb of Christ. He'll be making it visible. He'll be making that path visible to us, which is already visible to us liturgically, iconographically, in the church's liturgical cycle. I don't know, it might be useful to say that when I was first received into the Orthodox Church, I couldn't talk like this. It's taken me years to understand, to come to see that this is what salvation is. It's not just, I think that when I became Orthodox, what drew me to Orthodoxy was that its theological doctrine was so fresh and vibrant and so solid. It just, set my heart chords to vibrating. And I knew that it was true. It had a depth that I had not encountered anywhere else. But I think that I still received it as a body of information. But I believed that the Orthodox Church was the place where I would find my salvation. And so we were received into the Orthodox Church. But it took me years before I began to realize that there's more to the church than her doctrine, and that her doctrine is actually referring to an actual, ascetical way of life. I did the ascetical practices, but I didn't really understand what their purpose was, what their content was. My next step was to come to appreciate the liturgical worship of the church as where the theology of the church is being embodied and is being incarnate, if you will, in space and time. Those were my first two steps into the deeps of the Orthodox faith. And then the third step has been this, which has been for which Dr. Constantine Cavarnos has been a huge catalyst for me, huge help for me, and that is getting into my soul, really into my soul, and beginning to be serious about not just believing and not just about praying like I'm supposed to, but actually taking the tools that God has given all of us in hand, and with those tools begin the work of putting to death everything in me that's earthly. And that's what I want to share with you this Sunday, maybe next Sunday morning, maybe the following, that's what I'm asking Dr. Cavarnos to share with us over the next 2 Sundays. I was first introduced to Dr. Cavarnos, as were you, through his book, or through his story, on Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene of Lesbos. Emily and I. These were the saints that we shared with you last spring. And as those of you who heard us and heard the story, you know that it's a gripping story. It's a fascinating story. But my next introduction to Dr. Cavarnos was when I picked up, somehow, I don't even remember how I got this book, or when I got it, or where I got it from. But it's Dr. Cavarnos' edition of certain texts from the Philokalia. This particular volume is translated from the original Greek and edited by Constantine Cavarnos. And the reason that this book is significant is because in this book, in this Philokalia, which was compiled by the editorial board of G.E.H. Palmer, Philip Sherrard, and Callistos Ware, but you turn to the title page of this one and you see that Constantine Cavarnos was assisting in the compilation and the translation of this volume, but he wasn't in charge of it. Nonetheless, you look at the preface, I think it is, and in the acknowledgments, and you learn that Constantine Cavarnos was one of the significant contributors of the translation, along with two or three others. So he was heavily involved in the project of bringing the Philokalia to an English audience. But this particular series, edition of the Philokalia, which is now in 5 volumes, did not contain, for reasons that those outside of this work, except for Cavarnos, do not understand. They do not understand why this introduction to the original edition of the Philokalia by St. Nicodemus, the Hagurite, was not included. It's not included in this. So you wonder if there seems to have been a little bit of controversy around that, from what I can pick up. Why did you not put that introduction by St. Nicodemus that was in the original, the first edition of the Philokalia, why didn't you put it into the English? For whatever reason, they didn't. So you wonder if that's one reason that Dr. Cavarnos did this, because he put that introduction in there. And it's worth reading. Now, Dr. Cavarnos himself has an introduction to this. It's called a proem. He calls it a proem, is it? No, his is the introduction, and St. Nicodemus is writes the proem. And in both Cavarnos' introduction and in St. Nicodemus, which would have been written, when was this published? In 2000, the first edition was in 2008. So whenever this was published, Dr. Cavarnos' introduction, and then the proem written by St. Nicodemus to the original edition of the Philokalia, which would have been written about 1783 or so. In both of them, you have a description of what I'm calling in the catechism class the anatomy of faith, talking about the nous, the different powers and faculties of the soul, and how they are employed in this work of putting ourselves to death and uniting ourselves to Christ, but in the likeness of his death, and so that we find ourselves in his tomb and in the fountain of our resurrection. So Dr. Constantine was very much involved in these spiritual writings of the church. So as I said, Emily, you've read this. It's wonderful. Honestly, it shows, Dr. Cavarnos obviously has some depth of character. You can't write about the saints unless you have some saintliness yourself, honestly. I just now picked up this book, also by Dr. Cavarnos. You see that it's part of this book about Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene of Lesbos, modern Orthodox saints. There's a reason that Dr. Cavarnos put this series of modern Orthodox saints together. I'll get to that in a moment or two. But I just got this, and this is about Blessed Elder Gabriel Dionysiatus. And I mean, you can just look at the picture of Elder Gabriel, and I look at the picture and I begin to tremble, and yet I am drawn to him, even as I'm afraid of him. He just looks like a wonderful man. I mean, this looks like a real man, and, you know, full of wisdom, kindness, generosity. You can tell that this man has seen God. I think that's why I'm afraid of him, because that means that he would see me as I really am. I don't know that I want people to see me as I really am. And yet I want him to see me as I really am, because I want to be healed. And then he's written these other books as well. Some of them are academic, like this one, The Hellenic Christian Philosophical Tradition. Here he shows, I haven't read this one yet, I just got it. Here he shows how the Greek Orthodox tradition of the Philokalia was the continuation of the best of the ancient Greek philosophers. The ancient Greek philosophers saw the first two stages of man's ascent to heaven, but they didn't see the third. And the third is articulated in the writings of the Philokalia and in that tradition of the church. So this is how I was introduced to Dr. Cavarnos, through these books. And as I said, he was born in Boston, and he died in 2011. The math says that he was about 93 or 94 years of age when he died. At some point, he was tonsured a schema monk. Might have been later in his life, because in all of these works, and in other works that mention Dr. Cavarnos, they all refer to him as doctor or as mister. But if he was a schema monk, I think you'd be calling him father, even if he's not ordained. You call the monk's father. He'd be called Father Cavarnos. So if that's the case, if he was at some point he was tonsured a schema monk, why do you think he died in Florence, Arizona?
Was he at St Anthony's Monastery?
You wonder. And then, see, I don't know much about him. What I'm telling you is all that I've gleaned from bits here and there. Noah?
He did die at St. Anthony's.
Okay, how do you know that?
Well, I don't know where I know it from, but I just know it.
So somewhere you picked it up.
Yeah.
In this book, Anchored in God, this is a story of his journeys to Mount Athos. At least 3 of them. I'm sure he made more of them. But after the 3rd journey, he produced this book. It's a rather extensive description of his trip to Mount Athos. And towards the end, again, I just got this book and I haven't read it. But towards the end, you see that he was in the company of St. Joseph the Hesychist. Some of you who know St. Joseph will recognize. You recognize this? Can you see it, Noah? You recognize the picture? Yeah. He's also with St. Ephraim, who was the founder of these monasteries in the United States. So what does that tell us? That he was in the circle of St. Joseph and and St. Ephraim. So it makes all the sense in the world that towards the end of his life, after he had finished his professional work, if that was when he was tonsured a schema monk, before I don't know, but at any rate he was a schema monk, and he would take up his residence with the Ephraimites, with whom he had a spiritual connection, and he would end his days there among the Ephraimite monastics in Florence, Arizona. So from the few details that I've been able to glean here and there, I've learned that Dr. Cavarnos, Father Cavarnos, graduated from Harvard with a PhD. I can't say exactly in what he earned his PhD, but it must have been something along the lines of Byzantine and modern Greek studies. I don't know if he was the founder of, or if he was just the successor to the former founder or the president. of the Institute for Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies. So he in Boston. So he was the head of that. He taught, and so that's why it's and he taught, as it says, he taught philosophy at Harvard for some years. But he also taught at the University of North Carolina, and he taught at Wheaton College, of all places.
That's a wild place.
And he also has some good friends at Wheaton. So you wonder what kind of influence he had on people at Wheaton, the professors even. And Clark University, wherever that is. Does anyone know where Clark University is? Then he also taught at some other American schools. Besides philosophy, he also taught in the fields of Orthodox theology, Byzantine and modern Greek art and thought. So he was not only a philosopher, he was also something of an artist. And so you have this book of his, Orthodox Iconography, which is a very basic description of icons, their purpose, their function, a bit of their history. And then you also have this book, Meetings with Kontoglu, who was a master iconographer in Father Cavarnos' day. I think he died in 65. I think Kontoglu died in 65. But he established a very close friendship with Kontoglu, who did beautiful icons and frescoes and mosaics throughout the Greek mainland and the churches throughout there. And I had many conversations with Photios Kontoglu with regard to iconography, the philosophy, the different receptions of iconography and icons in the church in the West. So he was versed in iconography as well. So he was an artist, he was an iconographer, he was a philosopher. And since he was in Boston at Harvard, and I know that he also taught at Hellenic College, which is connected to Holy Cross or Greek Orthodox Theological Seminary. And nothing is ever said about Greek Orthodox, the Holy Cross Seminary, but if he was at Hellenic College, I wonder if he taught some courses at the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Theological Seminary. And the reason that this intrigues me is because when I was at St. Vladimir's, I was there in the 80s. So then he was born in 1918, so he would have been 62. He might have been retired, I don't know. He would have been older than 62. Because in the 1980 he would have been 62, so in 83 he would have been 64 or 5. He might have been retired. That might have been retired. But I see, I was at St. Vladimir's. I was only, a couple hours away from Boston. And my mentor was Father John Meyendorff, who was this world-class Byzantine scholar. And I'm intrigued now, I'm puzzled now, why I never heard him mention Dr. Constantine Cavarnos. It's possible that he did, but I was so new to Orthodoxy that it would have gone in one ear and out the other. I don't know these people. I don't know them from Adam. One name's as good as another to me. But we had all these bright lights coming through St. Vlad's all the time, throughout the world, from around the world. So I got to meet people like Henry Chadwick and what was his name, Babrinskoy from France. So we were always hobnobbing with these great names, at St. Vlad's. But I never heard him speak of Dr. Cavarnos. And it just intrigues me because obviously, as I can see now, Dr. Cavarnos was a beautiful man. He was, as I said, he was not only a philosopher, but he's also an iconographer, but it's also very clear that he was very much immersed in this way of prayer, in the way of the church, as I describe it, the inner exodus of the gospel. And it's very clear from his writings that not only was he a practitioner of this, what I call the inner exodus of the gospel, this path that leads us into the Lord's tomb, but it's also clear that he had very sound coaching, very sound teaching. He wasn't learning from just from what he himself experienced. His own experience was shaped by what he was being taught by people like, Father Ephraim. Who knows? Maybe Father St. Joseph, the hesychist, and other monks. Yes, Travis?
I was just wondering, I'm a bit fuzzy, but is a schema monk someone who's a monk who's been set aside just for the purposes of prayer?
But I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not real up on the terms either. Anybody answer that? What a schema monk precisely is? Yes, Matthew?
This is a like a very sort of fuzzy outline of my understanding of what schema monk. There's apparently like 3 stages of the monastic life. There are novices who have not yet taken binding vows in the monastery, but they are still in the monastery. They're still partaking of the monastic life. They're still working. They have jobs. They are under obedience to the abbot. And then the second stage are rossophores, people who bear the rasa, right? And those are the people who they have died to the world. They've taken on a new name.
They change their name at that point.
Yes,
right?
I believe so. And they are bound to that monastery and to that igumen under a much stricter obedience than the novices. And then schema monks, it's almost a second rasa that they have to put on.
Is it the final stage?
Yes,
The schema monk is the final stage.
I believe so.
That would indicate that he was tonsured some years earlier. Because it takes time to get to that point.
Much. You usually have to spend years in a monastery,
yeah.
like 20 or 30 years before you take on the schema.
So as I said, I never met Father Cavarnos, but I followed.
The stage is the great schema.
Oh, the great schema. Okay, so the schema is the next to last?
Well, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
we'll
know
have
if
to.
schema is just the grouping of it, but the great schema is
All
the
right.
third stage.
It might be worth looking into, but as I said, yes, Noah?
Sometimes they will ordain a schema monk even if they haven't been a novice or a regular monk.
Oh, they'll go straight
And
to?
I think that's what they did with Constantine Cavarnos since he came there as a very old
Yeah.
man.
Well, you look at all his works. I mean, he's immersed in this life of the church. If he was married, obviously his wife must have passed. But you wonder if he was married. I've fallen in love with Father Cavarnos. As I said, my mentor was Father John Meyendorff, and he was together with Father Alexander Schmemann at St. Vlad's. That was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those of us who attended seminary during those years look back on those as the golden years. Father Schmemann, Father Alexander were great lights. Father Hopko was their successor, and he was a brilliant light. But, even Father Hopko didn't shine half as brightly as Fathers Meyendorff and Father Schmemann. That's not to take anything away from Father Hopko. That's rather to give you a sense of how brilliant Meyendorff and Schmemann were. But I think that, and Schmemann and Meyendorff, they were engaged in a huge, huge, huge undertaking. That was for Father Meyendorff, you could say that his work, his fundamental work, was to rescue the Orthodox Church throughout America in all the jurisdictions was to rescue it from doctrinal fuzziness and to recover. So he would have been building on the work of Father Georges Florovsky, who was a professor. What was it, Princeton? He was a professor at Princeton. Father Meyendorff's work was to articulate the doctrine of the Orthodox Church as it is distinct from the West. And that meant, in particular, articulating the doctrine of the uncreated energies of St. Gregory Palamas, as was articulated by St. Gregory Palamas, which is axiomatic, which is central to the Orthodox understanding of salvation as theosis, becoming one with God. I know, and Father Schmemann, I would say that his chief work was to bring the liturgical worship of the church and to purify it from all of the ethnic abuses that had crept in and started corrupting the purity of that liturgical practice of the church, so that the theology of the church was being garbled by the liturgical practice. And as I said, this was a huge undertaking, not just from what I've read, but guys, also from what I have seen. You know, I'm the dean of this deanery. I've been the dean for some years now, and I've been all over, and I've seen some of these parishes that are still, you know, kind of on the fringes, on the outland, on the outback, that are still under the thrall of the old metropolia mentality. And I can tell you that this work of Meindorf and Schmemann was huge. And so it stands to reason that that was all they had the time to focus on. Plus, not only that, but they were also orchestrating and putting together what would become the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church that was granted in 1976. So they were giants. Meindorf and Schmemann were giants. But as a result, and I'm not the one who's making this critique, it's been made by others, the monastic aspect of the Orthodox Church, of the Orthodox life, was not emphasized as it should be in the OCA. It's interesting that the foundation of Orthodoxy and Orthoproxy with Meindorf and Schmemann, and those, from the way that they were that their teachings was taken, it's interesting that so many of the students from St. Vladimir's, including me, we came out rather cerebral, intellectual, focused on the upper reaches of Orthodox theology. But the beauty of Dr. Cavarnos is that he was swimming in this monastic way of life, and I would like to read this we'll close with this, and then that will get us prepared for next Sunday when we can begin going through a man's spiritual evolution and have Dr. Cavarnos describe to us, how one goes about doing this inner exodus, and what are the tools that one can call to one's aid, tools that we already have. But I want to read this. This gives us an insight into how it was that Dr. Cavarnos, even in his academic scholarship, was nonetheless grounded in the monastic, ascetical, spiritual life of the church. This is taken from chapter 6. I'm just going to read it to you. Through the ages, many have followed to some extent St. Anthony's procedure, either as a result of reading his biography or instinctively seeking, as he did, spiritual guidance and edification. And according to their zeal, they were helped to make spiritual progress. He's talking about St. Anthony the Great, the monk of the 3rd century, 4th century. I myself, prior to reading St. Athanasius' Life of Anthony, undertook to learn in such a way about the path to spiritual development, this is what I'm calling the inner exodus of the gospel, and the nature of the attainments to which it leads, that's theosis. I have gone 8 times to the great Orthodox monastic republic of Mount Athos, so 8 times. This book over here was produced after his 3rd trip, but he went 5 more times at least. I went to seek men who were advanced in the spiritual life. Accounts of several such visits are contained in my books, Anchored in God, which I have, The Holy Mountain, I might have that one, I have to go look in my library, and the Blessed Elder Gabriel de Niasatis, we also have that one. My visits there and to the historic monastery of Longovarda on the island of Paros, which until 1980 was under the direction of Blessed Philotheos Zervakos, who died in 1980, as well as my association with holy men living in the world, such as the devout icon painter and writer Photius Kuntaglu. We have his account of his dialogue, of his conversations with Photius here, and greatly augmented my knowledge and understanding about the ends and means of the spiritual life. As an example of the lessons taught to me by the holy men of Athos, I shall cite a remark made at the monastery of Estigmenu by a monk named Germanus. He asked me what my profession was. I answered, professor of philosophy. To this he remarked, good, very good. But cultivate faith and piety. Without these, man is a plain zero. Also, whatever you do, keep in mind the supreme aim. Our supreme aim as Orthodox Christians is salvation. And salvation, as he explains elsewhere in this book, is to become one with God, by being united to him in the likeness of his death and resurrection. Never do anything contrary to this aim. This remark made an indelible impression on my mind. It prompted me to give more attention to faith. You see, this was apparently a turning point in his life. You can see what he's indicating, what he's implying, that if he had not had this conversation, he might have gone the way of many other Orthodox academics. He may have gone the way of academia, stayed in the books. But this prompted me to give more attention to faith. Listen to this, which tends to be ignored in our time by professional philosophers, as well as by other academic people, including certain theologians. You wonder who he's talking about. There's a great deal of talk today about love among theologians, particularly the ecumenists, but faith is hardly ever mentioned. Seldom does one hear anyone speak of the fundamental importance of faith in the spiritual life. Yet without Christian faith, there cannot be real Christian love. Wholehearted love of God and love of one's neighbor, including one's enemies. The virtue of true Christian love grows out of true Christian faith. Where there is no such faith, there is no true love either. But what is faith and how does one acquire it? Well, that's what we want to find out from Dr. Cavarnos. But listen to this, the virtue of true Christian love grows out of true Christian faith. That should tell us the importance of orthodoxy, the true doctrine of faith. How can you possibly expect to have a true doctrine of faith, a true faith, if your teacher is not Orthodox? That is to say, truly, how would you say, worshiping in spirit and in truth. That's the importance of the Orthodox Church. All right, well, we need to get upstairs, and we need to get going on the Divine Liturgy. So that's what we'll have to look forward to next Sunday. We're hearing from Dr. Cavarnos.